Hey everyone, ever picked up a bandage, or used a thermometer and thought about the journey it took to get to your medicine cabinet?
Probably not the most riveting thought,
Right.
but fascinating trip, actually.
It totally is, and that's what we're diving into today, using this article, understanding the medical device approval process from concept to market.
Mm.
So we're talking everything from that initial spark of an idea all the way to the moment a device is actually available to patients.
And trust me, it's a lot more complicated than just like having a brilliant idea and just slapping it together in a lab.
Okay, so let's unpack that. So let's say I've got this amazing idea for a new medical device. Where do I even begin?
Well, before you even think about like prototypes or patents or anything like that, you need to identify a genuine medical need. You might have the coolest tech in the world, but if it doesn't solve a real problem for doctors or patients, it's going nowhere.
So it's not enough to just be a cool gadget.
Right.
It's got to have a real purpose, a medical.
The application. Yeah.
Think of it like this. You wouldn't believe how many incredible medical innovations never see the light of day because they missed the mark on market needs. Imagine pouring your heart and soul into this device that's a technological marvel, only to discover that doctors don't actually need it or patients can't afford it. That's why this early stage of market research is so critical. That makes a ton of sense. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of an invention. But forgetting about the practical side of things is recipe for disaster. So, okay, we've got a solid concept. We know there's a demand for it. What's next? The article spends a lot of time talking about design and prototyping.
Right. And this is where things start to get really interesting, at least for me. This isn't just about making something that looks sleek and modern. It's about something called design control. It's actually a legal requirement.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not just a suggestion.
I had no idea there were legal requirements around the design phase. Tell me more about that.
It's all about ensuring the device is safe and effective. Everything from the materials you use to the way the user interacts with the device, all of it needs to be carefully considered and documented. Imagine a heart monitor that's, bulky and keeps falling off. Not exactly confidence-inspiring.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So how do they make sure a device is designed in a way that's both user-friendly and functional?
That's where prototyping comes in. And it's not a one-and-done kind of deal. The article really emphasizes how important it is to have an iterative process. You're building, testing, getting feedback, and refining the design constantly.
I'm guessing this is where they bring in, healthcare professionals and even potential patients to get their feedback.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Their input is invaluable. They can tell you if the device is actually usable in a real-world setting, if it makes their jobs easier, if it actually improves patient care. You don't want to wait until a device is in the market to figure out it's got major design flaws.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've got a device that's well-designed, user-friendly, addresses a real medical need. What happens next? It's got to be tested.
You got it. Before any human ever lays eyes on this device in a medical setting, it's got to go through a battery of tests.
Oh, yeah.
Which is what the next part of the article is all about.
Yeah, and I'm guessing we're not talking about a simple pass or fail here.
Definitely not. We're talking rigorous testing to make absolutely sure it's safe and effective. The article breaks it down into several stages. First up is bench testing, which is like it sounds. You're in a controlled lab environment, putting the device through its paces, simulating the conditions it'll be used in. Heat, cold, vibration, you name it, but no actual patients involved yet.
Okay, so really making sure the device itself can hold up under pressure, so to speak.
Exactly. Then comes biocompatibility testing, which is especially crucial for anything that will be used, inside the body or come into contact with bodily fluids. You don't want a device doing more harm than good.
Right, that's putting it mildly. What kind of things are they looking for in biocompatibility testing?
They're looking at the materials used in the device, making sure they won't cause any nasty reactions, things like inflammation, toxicity, you name it. They're making sure the device plays well with the human body. And depending on the device, this could even involve animal studies before moving on to human trials.
So if I'm picturing this right,
Yeah.
we've now got a device that's gone from a great idea to a well-designed prototype that's been put through the ringer in the lab, but we're still not ready to test it on humans, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be a whole other layer of approvals and regulations before we get to that point.
You're exactly right, and that's where things get really interesting and complicated.
Oh, boy.
Buckle up, because we're about to navigate the world of the FDA and the fascinating world of clinical trials.
So last time we left off, our hypothetical device had survived the lab and was looking pretty good, but there's a big difference between a lab bench and a real-life medical setting.
Right, right.
I'm guessing that's where the
Exactly. And that classification dictates the regulatory pathway the developers need to follow. In the US, for instance, you've got options like the 510K clearance, which is typically used for devices with lower risk and that are similar to devices already on the market. Then there's pre-market approval, or PMA, which is much more rigorous and required for higher risk devices that might be the first of their kind.
I'm sensing a but coming.
There's always a but, right?
That.
It's not just about navigating the FDA either. If a company wants to market a device internationally, they have to consider regulations in each target market.
Yeah.
Europe has its own system with CE marking, for example, and those processes can differ vastly from the US system.
So it's not a one-and-done kind of deal.
Nope.
Getting a device to market globally sounds incredibly complex.
It absolutely can be. But let's assume for now that we've successfully navigated the regulatory maze, dotted all our I's and crossed our... It's what's the next hurdle for our device?
It's time for the real deal, right?
Okay.
Testing it out on actual humans with clinical trials.
You got it. Clinical trials are a critical and very delicate part of bringing a medical device to market. The article emphasizes just how much data is needed to definitively prove that a device is both safe and effective for its intended use.
So walk me through these clinical trials. They don't just hand it over to a bunch of volunteers and see what happens, do they?
Not quite. It's a much more controlled and structured process than that. It starts with phase 1 trials, which are all about safety. They test the device in a small group of people, usually healthy volunteers, to identify any immediate red flags, risks, or side effects.
So really making sure the device isn't going to cause any harm before they start testing for effectiveness.
Exactly. If phase 1 looks good, then it's on to phase 2, where they expand the participant pool and start looking more closely at whether the device actually does what it's supposed to do.
And if the device passes phase 2 with flying colors.
Then it's on to phase 3, the big leagues of clinical trials. This involves a much larger and more diverse group of participants to confirm the findings from the earlier trials and get the most comprehensive data possible on both safety and effectiveness. These trials can take years and involve thousands of patients.
Wow, we're talking about a massive amount of data.
It's a massive undertaking, but absolutely essential, especially when you consider what's at stake. We're talking about people's lives and well-being here. Every data point, every participant represents someone's hope for a better outcome. It's a huge responsibility.
That's a really powerful way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say our device makes it through all 3 phases of clinical trials without a hitch. What's next?
Well, you'd think that would be it, right? Years of research and development, countless hours of testing, but the journey isn't over yet. There's still a lot to do before a device lands in a doctor's hands, and that's what we'll uncover when we come back for the final part of our deep dive.
So we're back, and last time we left off, our hypothetical device, it had, gone through all that testing, made it through clinical trials. What's next?
Right. So we've talked about proving a device is safe and effective, all of that. But now we got to think about making sure it can actually be manufactured, right? And not just made, but manufactured to those same standards every single time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Consistency is, that's got to be super important when it comes to medical devices, right? You don't want any surprises when a patient's health is on the line.
Exactly. And that's what's so important about this next phase. The article calls out good manufacturing practices, or GMP.
GMP, what is that?
So think of GMP as like a really strict set of guidelines. They cover everything. The materials, the facilities, even the packaging and labeling.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about like churning out as many devices as possible. It's about making sure each one meets those standards.
Right, and that's where a quality management system comes in, or QMS.
Okay, another acronym.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. But basically, the QMS is there to make sure quality is just, built in from the get-go every single step of the way.
So even after a device is approved, there's still this huge focus on making sure those standards are met.
Oh, absolutely. And it goes even further than that. Remember all that data we talked about from the clinical trials? That data collection doesn't just stop.
Really? So what happens?
Well, once a device is actually out there being used, you have something called post-market surveillance.
Post-market, so they keep an eye on it even after it's available to the public.
Exactly. Companies have to monitor how their devices are performing in real-world settings.
Makes sense because, clinical trials can only tell you so much, right? It's when more people start using it that you might start seeing things that weren't obvious before.
Exactly. They need systems in place to track any adverse events, handle complaints, and if necessary, issue recalls. It's all about making sure the device is doing what it's supposed to and that it's safe for everyone.
So it's like a continuous feedback loop, even after a device is on the market. That's incredible.
It really is, and that feedback is so important, not just for, catching problems, but also for figuring out how to make things even better. Doctors and patients using the device, they might have insights that lead to design improvements, things like that.
That's amazing. So thinking back to our device now, it's been through this whole journey.
Yeah.
What's the biggest takeaway for, say, someone like me, someone who might need to use a medical device someday?
It really comes down to trust, you know? Trusting the process. When you see a medical device, whether it's something as simple as a bandage or something as complex as, an implant, you can be confident that it hasn't just magically appeared. It's gone through this incredibly tough process to get there.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of take those innovations for granted, but like you said, there's a ton of work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure these things are safe,
Yeah.
effective, that people can actually use them and that they actually work.
That's it. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. The amount of, I don't know, ingenuity and dedication it takes to bring these devices to life.
Absolutely. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of medical devices. We've gone from that initial idea all the way to a device that's, hopefully improving people's lives. And hopefully this is giving you a new appreciation for how much goes on behind the scenes. If you want even more detail, I definitely recommend checking out the full article, Understanding the Medical Device Approval Process from Concept to Market.
Hmm.
It's really interesting stuff.
For sure. For sure.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.